Hey guys, today we're in the book of Leviticus, chapter 24. We've talked about the spiritual sacrifices, the priest, purity, the Day of Atonement, now working backwards, purity, the priest, and now the rituals of feast and things that they need to do. And so after looking after the feast yesterday, today we get some, what we would kind of say is we know we're getting to the end of the book. God is kind of bringing everything together. And so here he talks gives some more details about the tabernacle. And so not only do we have to keep these feasts, but there are some things that they must do in the tabernacle to remain holy or clean or pure. And one of them is the lamp, to keep the lamp continually burning. This is that golden, solid gold candelabra that is in the holy place. If you remember, you walk in the tabernacle, the candelabra would be to your left, and to your right is the table of the presence of showbread. In front of you is the little altar of incense that always is going up, and then the veil that is keeping you from the most holy place. And so this candelabra has to be olives from that are beaten, and it is to be kept burning regularly, which means it should continue to burn. There should never be any darkness in the presence of God. Kind of echoes where Jesus stands in the temple and he says, I am the light. There in God, there is no darkness. We see that in 1 John. And so something the priests had to do. Another thing they had to do was the bread of the tabernacle. That table, when you walk into the tabernacle on the right, it must have 12 loaves of bread. And here we get how they should stack them. There would be 2 stacks of 6. And so what's interesting about this is you think, man, God's just really being very particular. But the point is not necessarily how they're stacked, but what are they made of? What's going on here? And so we will find in the New Testament that these 12 loaves of bread, meaning Israel, right? They're in 2 stacks of 6. But what do they have? They have things that are fine flour, baked, frankincense on each pile. So it's this bread that is specially made with these special ingredients. And what brings them all together? The aroma of frankincense. And so this bread is special. It gives a semblance of the church. How the church, we're made with holy and fine and pure things. That's what we are. We are saved through blood, so we are holy. But it is our fragrance of love, that people will know that we are the church. And so you can imagine that the loaves of bread would be different than any other loaf of bread because of its fragrance. And so it's kind of a little drawing into the New Testament church. And then we kind of get this weird kind of part where we're talking very specific about the tabernacle, and then we get some sin issues, right? And the biggest deal that's going on here is, who is this about? God has already given all of these laws and regulations on how Israel should act. But now we get kind of a case study of a Israelite woman's son whose father was Egyptian. So he is not fully Israel. He's not fully an Israelite. He is not an Egyptian. He's what we saw in Exodus chapter 12 called the mixed multitude. There were a lot of people who came out of Egypt that wasn't just Israel, okay? Lots of people came out. Some of those were intermarried in with these Hebrews, but some of them were not. And so what happens when somebody sins and they're not Israel? What should we do about that? And so God is giving rules and regulations on what do you do with people who are around Israel, but they are not of Israel. What rules and what laws do we follow? And what happens? He blaspheming the name of God. Blasphemy simply means to attack. That's truly what it means, right? To attack. And so what do? It says that they put him in custody. Basically, they put him in jail until the will of the Lord should be cleared. They didn't mob him. They didn't kill him. They locked him up and said, God's got to tell us what to do on this one. This is outside of what God has told us to do. And so the Lord spoke to Moses and said, bring him out of the camp, all the ones, the one who cursed and all the ones who heard him, and lay their hands on him, right? Now, this is something that we will read in the book of Deuteronomy. God continues to add laws, and in Deuteronomy chapter 17, we see this, that two or more would lay their hands on a person before they killed them, because and it was a point of saying, I hear you, I see you, but God has spoken, right? So laying their hands on him is saying, I've heard your defense, but the judge still says you're guilty, and he has given us the penalty. And God says, take him out and stone him. All of the congregation stone him. And so here we get this precedence of people who are not even Israel, but around Israel, are still tied to the laws of Israel. And so it's very important. Whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall be surely put to death. Verse 16, right? So we're getting a precedence, not just Hebrews, but anybody that is around Israel, they come under this law. And then in verse 18, in 17 and 18, we get these rules. If you take a human life, you should be put to death. It says, if you take an animal's life, you shall make it good. It doesn't mean that if you kill a lamb because you want some lamb chops, then you've got to do something. That's not what it's talking about. It means if you kill an animal that's not yours, you must make it good. You must give life for life. If you accidentally killed a lamb of your neighbor, then you would have to give them a lamb or the money for that lamb. And then verses 19 and following, it says, if anyone injures your neighbor as he has done to him, fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. My whole life, I've heard this verse quoted, right? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, right? And here's how this verse is so misused. This is not a law. God is not saying an eye for an eye. If somebody pokes out your eye, you poke out their eye. He's not saying it's a law. God is saying it is a limit. Okay, it's important. It's not a law, it's a limit. If somebody poked out your eye, it doesn't mean God says you have to poke out their eye. He says that you can punish them up to taking their eye. But if somebody poked out your eye, you couldn't kill them. You couldn't cut their head off, because that's not equal justice, right? God is always about equal justice, but he's also about love and mercy. And so he's saying he's not setting a law, he's setting a limit here. And that's important as we continue to read the Old Testament. And then what happens at the end? At the end, verse 23, it comes back around to the story. They brought this half Egyptian, half Israelite man out, and they did just as God said, and they brought him out of the camp. They cursed him and stoned him. They obeyed God's word. And so we're just getting these final rules on how Israel should live according to the tabernacle, but what should they do with people that are around them that maybe are not fully Israel or full Hebrews, fully God followers? And so God is giving us some precedents so they would know how to react. And you'd ask yourself, well, where is Jesus at in this chapter? This is kind of a weird, seems like a catch-all chapter. But it's interesting, when I read verse 16, whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. You might remember in the New Testament book of Matthew, chapter 9, after Jesus preaches the Sermon on the Mount, he's going back and forth with the Pharisees. And in the first time we see in chapter 9, verse 3, the Pharisees say that Jesus blaspheming. At the very beginning of the book, they were calling for his death. If anyone who blasphemes the name of the Lord shall be put to death. And so at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, they were already calling for his death. Because they believed that he was blaspheming the name of God because they did not believe he was God. But because he was God, he did not sin, he did not blaspheme, but yet he still went and died so that we may be made right again through the perfect sacrifice. Hope that makes sense, and we will see you tomorrow in chapter 25. God bless.